Respect in dialogue is often the most overlooked yet most powerful element in politics. When tempers rise and egos clash, the true test of leadership isn't found in who speaks the loudest, but in who listens the most. That idea played out clearly during the exchange between Marco Rubio and Jasmine Crockett, a moment that began as a routine hearing and ended as a quiet lesson in restraint and communication. Rubio, known for his sharp debating skills and direct approach, entered the discussion prepared and assertive. He has always been a confident speaker, someone comfortable steering a conversation and pressing for clarity. On that day, however, his persistence crossed into interruption, not maliciously, but out of the intensity that often comes when two passionate public servants stand on opposite sides of an issue. Crockett, by contrast, is equally passionate but often measured, preferring to frame her responses carefully rather than meet force with force. As the hearing unfolded, Rubio's interruptions began to stack up. Each time Crockett tried to expand on her point, he cut in, clarifying, correcting, or challenging her phrasing. It wasn't yelling or it was something subtler, a conversational tug-of-war, where one side simply didn't get enough time to finish a thought. In a political culture where soundbites are prized and airtime is limited, moments like that can shift public perception quickly. The senator's style, though not uncommon in political hearings, reminded everyone how easily dialogue can turn into monologue if respect isn't balanced with conviction. Crockett's patience was noticeable. Many others might have matched his interruptions with equal energy, raising their voice or pushing back mid. Instead, she let each interjection pass. She waited. The restraint wasn't weakness, it was awareness. Every pause she took gave the room a chance to recognize the imbalance in the exchange. Respect, after all, isn't just about how one speaks. It's about how one responds when not allowed to. Her silence became its own quiet statement, showing that dignity often speaks louder than defense. By the sixth interruption, the rhythm of the conversation had changed. Rubio continued to challenge, but the atmosphere in the room had shifted. Observers began to notice not just the argument itself but the tone, the difference between pressing for accountability and pushing for dominance. When Crockett finally spoke her now viral seventh line, she did so calmly. "Senator, I'm happy to answer your question, if you'd like to actually hear the answer." That sentence was more than a clap. It was a mirror held up to the conversation itself. It wasn't about scoring points or embarrassing anyone. It was about drawing attention to a fundamental principle that often gets lost in modern politics: mutual respect. Rubio, to his credit, seemed to understand that immediately. He leaned back, let her speak, and from that moment forward, the exchange became balanced again. It was as if that single line recalibrated the tone in the room. What makes this moment so telling isn't the political disagreement at its core, but the human element behind it. Everyone has been in a conversation where they felt unheard. The frustration of being cut off, of seeing your thoughts dismissed before they're fully formed, can bring out defensiveness in almost anyone. For a public figure, that feeling is amplified. Millions are watching, every reaction recorded. Yet Crockett's response showed how restraint can diffuse tension and reset the tone. Rubio's eventual decision to step back and let her finish showed that respect, when reintroduced, can restore balance to even the most heated dialogue. Respect in dialogue doesn't mean agreement. It doesn't mean avoiding difficult questions or sidestepping conflict. What it does mean is allowing each person the space to express their point before being challenged. That's not just politeness, it's the foundation of understanding. In political hearings, respect often determines whether the public sees a productive debate or just another partisan spectacle. The Rubio-Crockett moment became an example of that line being drawn in real time. For Rubio, it may have been a moment of reflection on the difference between persistence and interruption, both born from passion, but separated by perception. His intent might have been to hold Crockett accountable, yet the delivery overshadowed the substance. The senator's pause after her remark, though brief, was meaningful. It demonstrated that even experienced politicians can recognize when a conversation needs to reset. In the end, that single exchange illustrated why respect remains the cornerstone of effective dialogue. Without it, even the most important discussions collapse under ego and impatience. With it, disagreement can still lead to clarity. In that committee room, respect didn't end the debate. It simply made it possible for the debate to finally begin. Composure over conflict is a quality that defines strong leadership, especially in moments when tempers could easily flare. During the exchange between Marco Rubio and Jasmine Crockett, this principle stood at the heart of what made their interaction so memorable. Crockett's ability to stay calm, measured, and unshaken even after being interrupted several times wasn't just a display of politeness. It was a demonstration of control, awareness, and professionalism under pressure. And in contrast, it offered a subtle reflection on how composure can shift the dynamic of power in any conversation, even when the other person appears to dominate the floor. Marco Rubio is a seasoned politician, known for his articulate style and confidence in public settings. He's used to taking charge in hearings, pressing witnesses or colleagues to clarify their points. and steering discussions toward accountability. His intent, most likely, wasn't to silence Crockett, but rather to control the pace and direction of the conversation, a habit that comes naturally to someone who's spent years navigating high-stakes debates. But in doing so, he created an environment where it seemed like Crockett's perspective was being constantly interrupted before it could unfold. Asterisk, that's when composure made all the difference. Crockett didn't raise her voice, didn't rush to cut him off in return, and didn't let frustration dictate her response. Instead, she chose the harder route to stay focused on her point while maintaining her tone. That choice transformed the moment from a heated clash into a quiet power shift. While Rubio's approach commanded the microphone, Crockett's composure commanded the room. Observers began to pay attention not to who was speaking more, but to who was staying centered. Asterisk in politics, calmness is often mistaken for weakness. But the truth is that composure is one of the strongest tools a speaker can possess. When tension rises, most people instinctively match the energy they're given. Crockett didn't. Each time Rubio interjected, she paused, gathered herself, and tried again, not out of submission, but out of discipline. That restraint is what gave her final remark its weight. Because she hadn't resorted to shouting or visible irritation, her seventh line, "Senator, I'm happy to answer your question if you'd like to actually hear the answer," landed with the kind of precision that can only come from control. Asterisk. That single sentence carried more force than any raised voice could have. It called out the behavior without hostility, reminded Rubio of the imbalance without accusation, and restored fairness to the exchange. More importantly, it demonstrated something rarely seen in tense political discussions: emotional intelligence. Crockett's composure didn't just protect her dignity, it changed the atmosphere in the room. After that line, Rubio took a step back. He allowed her to finish. The tone of the hearing shifted from confrontation to conversation. Asterisk for Rubio. It was a moment that likely reminded him of the fine line between assertiveness and overreach. His sharp questioning style has served him well in many situations, helping him appear decisive and informed. But in this instance, Crockett's.com poise created a contrast that made interruption look less like control and more like impatience. When she responded with grace instead of anger, she reframed the entire encounter, not as a contest, but as an example of how discipline can disarm intensity. Asterisk, that's the quiet power of composure. It redirects focus. While Rubio's interruptions initially drew attention, it was Crockett's patience that ultimately defined the moment. She showed that calmness doesn't mean passivity. It means choosing not to lose oneself in the chaos of disagreement. The people watching saw not just what was said, but how it was said. They saw how maintaining control over tone and timing could do what confrontation often fails to achieve: earn respect from both sides. Asterisk. Every public figure faces situations where composure is tested. The instinct to defend, correct, or interrupt is part of human nature, especially when one believes strongly in their position. Rubio's interruptions weren't unique in that regard. They reflected passion, conviction, and an eagerness to challenge opposing views. But what Crockett demonstrated was that real strength isn't shown by dominating the dialogue, but by maintaining calm while being tested. Her demeanor reminded everyone that professionalism doesn't require submission. It requires confidence grounded in self-control. Asterisk. The moment also revealed something subtle about leadership. True authority doesn't always come from speaking first or longest. Sometimes it comes from waiting, from allowing others to reveal their own impatience. Crockett didn't try to outtalk Rubio. She let him set the tone, then shifted it back with one composed remark. That balance between patience and precision is what separates reaction from response. Asterisk. In the end, composure proved to be the quiet equalizer. While Rubio's assertiveness carried the discussion forward, it was Crockett's.com presence that gave it meaning. The difference between conflict and resolution was measured not in volume, but in restraint. And in that room, it became clear which one left the stronger impression. Asterisk. The power of timing can turn an ordinary statement into something unforgettable, especially in politics where every word, pause, and glance can carry meaning far beyond the moment. During the exchange between Marco Rubio and Jasmine Crockett, timing played a central role not only in how Crockett eventually delivered her now famous line, but in how the entire room shifted from tension to reflection. It was a reminder that the impact of words often depends less on what is said and more on when it is said. Asterisk. Throughout the hearing, Marco Rubio spoke with his usual confidence. He's an experienced debater, quick on his feet, and skilled at framing discussions to highlight inconsistencies or challenge opposing viewpoints. His approach during that session reflected that same sharpness. Each time Crockett began to respond, Rubio interrupted, perhaps out of a desire to clarify or to redirect her argument before it went too far off track. It was an unusual behavior for a senator used to steering the tempo of a conversation. Still, the rhythm he created, fast, insistent, overlapping, left Crockett with little space to fully express her thoughts. Asterisk. Most people, when interrupted multiple times, would push back immediately. They'd cut in, raise their voice, or speak over the interruptions just to reclaim some balance. Crockett didn't. She let the interruptions happen, one after another, as if she were waiting for the right moment, not just the next opening. Her pauses weren't signs of surrender. They were calculated. Every time Rubio spoke over her, she observed, let the noise pass, and waited for the moment when silence could carry more weight than volume. That's what made her seventh line so striking. After the sixth interruption, Crockett didn't rush into frustration. She looked up, composed herself, and then said clearly, Senator, I'm happy to answer your question if you'd like to actually hear the answer. The timing of that line was perfect. It wasn't delivered in anger or haste. It arrived right after the tension had peaked, just as everyone in the room, and likely Rubio himself, had grown aware of the imbalance. By speaking then, and only then, she ensured that her words landed with maximum effect. Rubio's reaction reflected that realization. He didn't respond defensively. Instead, he paused, the same kind of pause Crockett had given him moments earlier. It was brief but telling. For a seasoned politician like Rubio, who's used to fast exchanges and sharp rebuttals, that moment of quiet acknowledgement showed recognition. Timing, in that instant, shifted from being his tool to being hers. In political dialogue, timing is often the invisible force that determines who appears composed and who appears reactionary. Rubio's interruptions were driven by urgency, a desire to challenge and control the narrative in real time. But Crockett's patience demonstrated that timing isn't just about speaking at the right moment. It's about waiting through the wrong ones. Every interruption built tension, and every pause she took stored that energy until it could be released in one measured, memorable line. What made the exchange so compelling was that both participants were, in their own way, using timing as strategy. Rubio used it to press forward, to keep the pace quick and assertive, reflecting his political instinct to dominate the rhythm of a debate. Crockett used it to slow things down, to highlight what was being overlooked. When two contrasting rhythms collide, speed versus stillness, the moment usually favors whoever can make the audience feel the shift. Crockett did exactly that. Observers in the room later noted how quiet things became after she spoke. There was no applause, no dramatic silence, just an unspoken recognition that the balance had shifted. Rubio, for all his experience, seemed to understand that pressing any further at that moment would only amplify her point. His decision to step back wasn't defeat, it was acknowledgement of timing's power. Even for someone as skilled as him, knowing when to pause can be just as important as knowing when to press forward. Crockett's delivery also underscored something fundamental about communication. Timing conveys respect. By waiting to speak, she showed respect for the process, even when she wasn't being given the same in return. And when she finally spoke, the respect she had maintained for the conversation became evident, making her remark not a jab, but a correction. Rubio's pause afterward suggested that he recognized that distinction. The timing made her statement not personal, but principled. That's what set the exchange apart from so many others in Washington. It wasn't about winning or losing a verbal sparring match. It was about rebalancing the pace of dialogue. Rubio, whose career has been built on quick, precise exchanges, was reminded that sometimes the most powerful words are the ones said after waiting long enough for everyone to listen. Crockett, through her patience and timing, didn't just make a point. She demonstrated the art of it. In that room, timing didn't belong to the louder voice or the more experienced speaker. It belonged to the one who knew when silence would make the message clearer. Public perception is the invisible currency of politics. It determines who appears credible, who earns trust, and who leaves an impression long after the debate ends. During the exchange between Marco Rubio and Jasmine Crockett, this truth came into sharp focus. What unfolded wasn't just a disagreement over ideas, but a vivid lesson in how tone, posture, and restraint can shape how an audience interprets a moment. In the world of public service, perception can either elevate or diminish even the most experienced politician. And Rubio, despite his skill and confidence, found himself caught in that delicate balance. Marco Rubio has built a career on being articulate and assertive. He's used to commanding attention, speaking quickly and precisely, and driving discussions with energy. That communication style has often worked in his favor, especially in televised hearings where clarity and confidence matter. But perception depends on context. On that particular day, his insistence on steering the conversation, repeatedly interjecting as Crockett tried to speak, created a picture that felt less like leadership and more like impatience. To some in the room, it may have seemed like he was just pressing for direct answers. To those watching from the outside, it came across differently. Each interruption changed the audience's perception just a little more. At first it looked like a firm exchange between two strong voices. By the third and fourth interruptions, viewers began to notice an imbalance. By the sixth, the conversation no longer looked like a debate. It looked like a struggle for space. That visual, even without the sound, carried weight. Crockett's stillness contrasted sharply with Rubio's urgency. She remained calm, hands folded, her expression thoughtful but controlled. The optics of that alone were enough to shift sympathy toward her side, even before she spoke her defining line. Then came the turning point. After 6 interruptions, Crockett finally delivered a single, calm sentence. "Senator, I'm happy to answer your question. If you'd like to actually hear the answer." It wasn't loud. It wasn't sharp, but it landed with precision. The timing was perfect, and so was the tone. In that moment, perception flipped entirely. Rubio, who had started as the dominant voice in the room, suddenly appeared as the one being corrected, not with aggression, but with grace. The remark wasn't designed to humiliate. It was designed to reset the conversation, and that, paradoxically, made it more powerful. Rubio's reaction said just as much as her words. For a brief moment, he paused. The assertive rhythm that had defined the exchange up to that point stopped. That silence spoke volumes. It showed that even someone as seasoned as Rubio recognized the shift in tone. The hearing continued, but the atmosphere was different. Crockett had earned the floor, and Rubio, perhaps aware of how the moment would appear, allowed her the space to finish. That subtle adjustment on his part demonstrated an understanding that public perception can't be ignored, even by the most confident speakers. In politics, image often outweighs intent. Rubio's goal might have been to push for clarity, but the optics suggested interruption rather than engagement. Crockett's goal might have been simply to answer, but her calm delivery made her seem like the more disciplined voice. Those who watched a clip online where context is often trimmed to a few seconds didn't see the nuances of the full discussion. What they saw was a senator cutting off a colleague multiple times, and a calm, collected representative bringing the room back to order with a single line. In a digital age, that's all it takes for perception to solidify into reputation. Rubio's challenge, in that sense, was not about what he said but how it looked when he said it. Public perception isn't always fair, but it's powerful. The same passion that can make a leader appear decisive in one setting can make them appear domineering in another. Crockett's restraint, on the other hand, translated visually into professionalism and strength. She didn't just win the exchange, she won the narrative that followed. Her poise became the story. For Rubio, the moment underscored something every public figure eventually learns. Even the smallest gestures can redefine how an audience sees you. He wasn't angry or out of control, but in the contrast between his assertiveness and her calm, people saw something larger about power and respect. In a space where perception is shaped by tone as much as by substance, one person's persistence can read as pressure, while another's patience can read as authority. Afterward, public discussion reflected this dynamic. Some praised Rubio for his persistence and passion. Others applauded Crockett for her grace and restraint. But regardless of political leanings, most agreed that the moment demonstrated how easily perception can turn. Crockett's measured demeanor became the visual takeaway, while Rubio's assertive questioning became the background. For someone as experienced as him, it was a reminder that communication is not only about controlling the message, it's also about managing how that message feels to the people who receive it. In the end, the exchange between Marco Rubio and Jasmine Crockett was never truly about winning or losing a debate. It was about the underlying principles that define public discourse: respect, composure, timing, and perception. Each of these elements came together in a single, unforgettable moment that reminded both politicians and the public of what meaningful communication should look like. For Marco Rubio, the hearing was another day in a long career of public service, one filled with questions, challenges, and efforts to hold others accountable. His approach, shaped by years of experience, reflected the sharpness and drive that have long been part of his political identity. Yet, even the most seasoned figures can be reminded that passion without patience can be misinterpreted. What might feel like pressing for truth can sometimes appear as an unwillingness to listen. Rubio's skill in debate has never been in question, but this moment revealed how easily confidence can cross into perception as dominance, especially in a public forum where every second is recorded and replayed. For Jasmine Crockett, it became a defining instance of professionalism under pressure. Her ability to stay composed, to wait through interruptions, and to deliver one perfectly timed line showed that power doesn't always come from volume or authority. It often comes from restraint. By saying less, she said more. Her words resonated because they carried a truth that extended beyond the immediate debate. Respect must be mutual, and listening is as important as speaking. Crockett's demeanor, calm, yet firm, represented the kind of strength that doesn't need to overpower. It simply needs to stand its ground. The broader lesson from that exchange reaches far beyond Capitol Hill. In workplaces, classrooms, and everyday conversations, the same principles apply. Dialogue breaks down when one side dominates and the other feels unheard. Real communication, the kind that builds trust and understanding, only happens when people make space for each other's voices. What Crockett demonstrated wasn't just political poise. It was a model for human interaction. And what Rubio experienced was a reminder that even well-intentioned intensity can lose its meaning if it overshadows empathy. Public reaction to the moment showed just how deeply people crave civility and balance in discourse. Viewers didn't remember every detail of the policy discussion, but they remembered how it felt: the tension, the shift, and finally, the calm resolution. In that sense, the moment became symbolic. a reflection of the broader need for patience in a culture that often rewards interruption. It also served as proof that respect isn't a sign of weakness. It's a sign of maturity. Asterisk, as the hearing faded from the headlines, its lesson remained. The most impactful moments in politics, and in life, are rarely about who speaks the most or who gets the last word. They're about who listens, who waits, and who chooses their words with purpose. Marco Rubio and Jasmine Crockett's exchange will be remembered not for its conflict, but for the quiet shift that happened when composure met intensity and respect